Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host and producer. Thank you for downloading today's episode. Today, we're going to talk about the metabolic approach to cancer with Dr. Naisha Winters, and I will tell you first, she's awesome. And if you haven't heard her first episode, Healing into Dying, I would seriously recommend stopping this recording and going and finding that show and starting there, because we are bouncing off of that conversation into this one. And I also will apologize because what happened last week with Dr. Sanda also happened with Dr. Naisha because I recorded them in the same day. So the mic was still set to the same setting, and I was completely bummed that the gain was down too low and I sound like I'm coming through my computer microphone. So I apologize. It isn't awful. If you made it through last week, you'll make it through this week. I will try very hard never to let that happen again. I have to figure out how to test myself as I'm doing this. So please forgive me and know that it also, by the end, we start getting silly and we're having a great time, and I really could keep her forever and talk. So it's on video, and so it doesn't really translate as much on the audio, our sort of being silly at the end. So if you want to watch the video, go to jjflazanes.com. TV. Again, that's jjflazanes.tv. Before I remind you about Dr. Naisha Winters, I do want to remind you about an announcement I made last week, which was that I'm doing a webinar called Building Your Business with the Law of Attraction. Again, Building Your Business with the Law of Attraction. It's a webinar on Wednesday, October 28th, 5 p.m. Pacific time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. It is free. So if you're interested, go to jjflazanes.com/LOA, Law of Attraction, B-I-Z, biz, LOABIZ. Okay, jjflazanes.com/LOABIZ. I'll also announce that we are now taking early bird applications for the 2021 Inner Circle Mastermind. And there is a significant discount by signing up in the early bird timeframe. That means before November 1st. So you can go to jj'sinnercirclemastermind.com to learn more and to see what it's about. There are 2 different tracks, so it's not a one size fits all. You can choose which track might be appropriate for you, but it does require a conversation. It does require us deciding if it's a fit for both of us and for the group and for your goals. And I would just recommend go check it out and fill out the application. Let's have a conversation. So that's jj'sinnercirclemastermind.com. And both of those links will be in the show notes. So Dr. Naisha Winters is a sought-after luminary and global healthcare authority in integrative cancer research. She consults with physicians around the world, bridging ancient therapies with advancements in modern medicine in the digital era. A personal journey with cancer and a medical career spanning over 25 years has Dr. Naisha on a mission to educate and empower the nearly 50% of the population expected to have cancer in their lifetime. You can learn more at drnaisha.com. Again, we get into a lot of different things in this episode. I'm very excited. Please forgive me for wanting to have seriously great conversations with educated people who I'm in alignment with. So there is a part in the beginning where I'm just talking more. So don't worry, she will be talking a lot more by the end. So I appreciate your patience, your understanding, your interest, and I can't wait for you to enjoy today's amazing episode. Thanks so much.
Welcome everyone to the show today. I am back, Dr. Naisha. I'm so excited for this conversation. We're finally going to get to talk about the metabolic approach to cancer. Okay, I wanted to talk about this book last time I interviewed her on the show, Healing into Dying. If you have not heard it, please stop today's recording or this video, go back and listen to it because it'll give you context for what we're about to talk about. Her cancer story, her healing cancer story is amazing. And it's so amazing that I kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper into it, that it took up the entire show, which is why I begged her to come back to do today's show so we can actually get to the book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. And so in what I love about Dr. Naisha, what I love about the work that she's doing is we're looking at what I think are sort of common sense things, okay? Common sense things, meaning that food is how we feel ourselves, and our environment which we live in affects our bodies, and the feelings and the emotions and the levels of stress that we have also affect our bodies. We don't have to overcomplicate things. And when it comes to cancer, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts about, because, you know, this is why I love this, because I think I was telling you that Dr. Bruce Lipton, before I ever read his book, when I heard about it, The Biology Belief, it resonated so deeply that I was like, I get it. Yes, of course. The way that you think, what you believe affects your biology. End of story. I don't need more to convince me. Now, to educate other people, to go deeper, to learn about it, absolutely. But in the moment, it resonated on a level that I'm like, yeah, I get that. Just like I said to him, I don't need to know that gravity, to explain gravity to me so that I believe it. I'm living it. It resonates, right? So when it comes to balancing out the factors of cancer and how we, I know there's only so much data that we can track. We can measure things. And then there are certain things that aren't necessarily easily measured. I mean, law of attraction and quantum physics would disagree, but the average person isn't measuring that. They're not looking at emotion or stress levels. They're looking at their cortisol levels to tell them how stressed they are. They're looking at their sleep patterns to tell them how stressed they are. But they're not, they're looking at their brain chemistry to tell them how depressed they are. But they're not actually stepping back to the environment that created that in the first place. So while I know there's data to support all kinds of different points of view, I always go back to, but what was their belief system? What were the emotions they were holding on to? And again, I think that it's all in balance. So what would you think the balance of those things in your work and your experience of emotional, food, and then environmental factors? Because we live in a world full of toxins and all kinds of stuff that we're not a victim to them per se, but they are there and they do hurt us if we aren't in balance with them, if we don't take steps to deal with them. So what do you think that balance would be between those factors?
Well, first, I love that you're bringing up this context because a lot of people think that in the scientific method today that there's one cause of cancer and that's a genetic cause, which we're going to, of course, debunk today. But when we look at sort of what I've learned over nearly 30 years for myself and others, there's more of this almost like three-legged table concept. I talk about that with some about kind of the mind, body, spirit. But in this context, we can talk about food, thoughts, and environment and how those all interplay. And they are big players on this stage for sure. And so when I think about across the board, I would probably give them a 30 percentage with this sort of extraneous 10% that creates our, biochemical individuality, experiential biochemical individuality as well. And also having the understanding that that's sort of that 30-30 context, but it also morphs and moves at different times and phases of our lives. So it's not a set in stone process. And it also means that it's under our own influence to change it up as needed. So I think that's kind of how I've seen it as the big picture. And we'll dive into some of the other components that feed in to that 90% of this being diet and thought and environment and how that translates differently between, say, you and I, like why I would have a certain experience with something and you would have a different experience to the exact same stimuli, to the exact same input.
Yeah, you're 30-30. It's a very balanced, very Libra way of explaining that, which we know from our last show. She's a Libra.
Yeah.
But I understand, and what I do appreciate, at least about the balance, is that there's a scientific community that discounts the stress and emotion. It's funny because people say, especially like the male population, they'll say, I'll say it's emotional. And again, that word emotion on a lot of people's ears is so unscientific. They go, emotion. What are you talking about? Right. And then I'll say, but then if I say it's stress, oh yeah, I'm stressed. I'm like, what the hell do you think stress is? Stress is emotion, but you can't say emotion because somehow it makes people discount it. But yet we can measure certain ways that stress affect our lives. But stress, everybody, is emotion. Stress, you're not a victim to stress. Stress is a perception of something that causes a feeling that feels uncomfortable, and you label it as stress. So I appreciate at least you gave it 30%, right? Because I tend to always look for an emotional root of what something is also, because I know plenty of people who are doing all the right things physically, but they're super toxic emotionally. And again, and I know you were talking about, and again, environmental, who they are, those things are going to change.
Well, let me give an example. I had a really interesting case this week with a young woman with breast cancer. Okay. And I always ask for a chronology of people's lives. So I want to know what they perceive to be big events in their life from basically preconception all the way to the moment that we're having this consultation with their doctor. Right. So this woman, on and on, it was 7 pages, single spaced, like literally down to, I fell off a jungle gym at 3 years old. I mean, details down to that level, every single significant relationship experience, from a boy kissing her without her permission when she was in 3rd grade, to everything up to multiple bad relationship situations, job situations, physical traumas and motor vehicle accidents, all the way along the way. But what I saw in that chronology was what she didn't mention, which was she literally gave an entire sort of soliloquy to the most basic fundamental, like, life hiccups of, oh, I had a car accident, or I fell off a horse, or I kissed a boy, or, lost my virginity at this time. And yet she never spoke once about her relationship with her parents. And there were so many elements about her life and experience. It was so skimmed over that even what she chose to share with me was exactly what she didn't share, was what was the most important in that situation. So for her, to me, the mental emotional, it was very, very quick and easy to see her massive love addiction and issues around that have never been fulfilled in her 43 years on this planet. Okay. So that was very interesting for me to look at that. The second piece, though, of how her emotions are affected by her diet and lifestyle and environment is she also is an artist who's exposed to very toxic chemicals. And without giving too much away, in case she ever hears this, I don't want to ruin her privacy, but she has very particular toxic exposures that definitely change her hormonal structure. So she's definitely being exposed to major metals. She's a metal worker, and she gets all these things that are metalloestrogens that are changing her hormones drastically, and her dietary choices also impacting this. So just to give an example, when I talk about that 30-30-30, this person's mental health is being just as damaged by her toxic exposures in her work environment, to her toxic choices in relationships and occupations, to the toxic or less than nourishing choices of foods that she's put into the system, which are going to impact her thoughts. And then when we overlay that with her epigenetics, this woman literally had every SNP, every single nucleotide polymorphism you can imagine with regards to dopamine balance. She's literally always seeking the quick fix joy. She is extremely depleted in dopamine in her life, which is going to make her estrogen dominant, which is going to make her a bad candidate for hormones of any kind, even birth control, which her past experiences showed that, is going to make her difficult for fertility issues, is going to make her difficult in bonding with another. So you start to see how these things all play on each other. And in my world, I'm able to take all that information in. I'm like a data lake that takes it all in. And then I'm like, what is popping up out of this? Like, what lotus is blossoming out of the mud from these experiences? And so for this woman, they're all like, oh, you have breast cancer and it's ER/PR positive, therefore it's hormonally driven. But I start looking and I'm like, it's metalloestrogen driven. It's dopamine excess, or dopamine deficiency driven. It's being a vegan for too long and having the right nutrient underbase to feed yourself, nourish yourself, and build these building blocks is contributing to your hormonal and mental emotional health, not you have a cancer that has receptors on it as the problem. And so it's just an example when I start to look at these things like I know there's kind of these equal playing fields, but for certain people at certain times, one pops up more than another. And I also want to add to that, I do agree with the idea that our thoughts are always woven into all of this, but sometimes our thoughts are played upon by exogenous factors. So malnourishment, over excess of certain foods. I mean, if you are having sugar issues, you're bipolar, you're all over the map. If you are dealing with major sleep deprivation, you can't function at all. So all of those things also impact the way we think and feel and filter into the world too. So that's a little bit of a bigger build out on that 30-30-30 platform.
What I love about that explanation, because it's exactly how I handle. So in my last book, the Invisible Fitness Formula, 5 Secrets to Release Weight and End Body Shame, I talk about digestion and I take people through 5 secrets to release weight and end body shame. But that first conversation about food isn't really about food, it's about digestion. Mm-hmm. And it's also about, again, that craving. Because most people will think, oh, well, if I have food cravings, I must be an emotional eater. And it's like, no, there's a biochemical response and there's an emotional response. We have to figure out which one it is. So if we put you on an elimination diet first and see if the cravings go away, it may not be emotional. We had Nourishing Wellness and Jeannie Peters and I, we had a patient that went through Dr. Allen, Jeannie, then came to me for the exercise piece. And I immediately said to this man, did you do a food sensitivity test? And he said, I did. And I said, well, you go back to Jeannie and you do a food sensitivity test. The man had himself in therapy. He declared himself an emotional eater. He was Overeaters Anonymous. He had like literally 6 different things going on, support groups for emotional eating. After he took the test, I came back, he lost 16 pounds in a couple of weeks because he took out dairy. He was eating corn, he was eating dairy, and all of a sudden his cravings went away. And he was like, oh, maybe I'm not an emotional eater. Wow. So it is. So I'm with you. I'm right with you on that. And that's why when people like want to say quickly, well, it's just this equals this. This causes cancer. I have to say bullshit. I don't believe any one thing causes any one thing because you're taking that out of the constructs of the entire picture. It has to be within the context of the picture, and the picture is very layered. It's layered from your epigenetics and your environment, and to me, your astrology and your firstborn childness and your love languageness and your food that you eat and the exercise and the vibration and frequencies that you live at. It is all the things.
Exactly. I call it the terrain, what you just described. And so the soil in which we live is dependent on us of what we put into it, of what we amend it with, or what we deprive it of. And that does lead to what sprouts from it. And so that is a very sort of esoteric concept for many, and yet it is the entire basis of how we survive. It's how we eat. It's like we can't grow anything without, soil. It's like that's true for us emotionally, spiritually as well. And we have to be able to be adaptable and flexible to the changes in our environment. So as you said so beautifully before, stress isn't the cause, it's our response to that stress, because stress is going to be around us all the time, right? So how we choose to respond to that stress is very unique and is very telling of how we're going to express health or disease in our bodies. And so I always also tell people that biochemically, stress looks the same whether you're celebrating a wedding or whether you're running from a fire. Your body has the same biochemical expression to that. So this place that we have to learn is more of a place where, like the Buddhists call it equanimity, like just sort of like don't be hyper reactive or overly excitable or under excitable in anything, kind of creating this more even keel homeostatic observer of the world around you and adapt and adjust accordingly as you move along. Is what we have lost so much of in our world and our culture is we've lost this ability to adapt. We all want it to be 74 degrees every day of the week, every day of the year, forever. And if it's a little bit warmer or a little bit cooler, we freak out and we don't know how to adjust. Now that's just an example, but that's also when we freak out about the person in front of us in line taking too long, or the traffic light taking too long, or that your diet, choices are probably not the best genetic match for you, or whatever it may be, we're not adapting well to the world around us. And so, like you said, toxins are all around us, but we can help ourselves respond to it differently and better.
Absolutely. And we can learn about how to do that. And I think what I really like about you and your work is that, and again, I was thinking about this today on a rollerblade. I get all my best ideas on a rollerblade. Was that there are really only 2 choices, in my opinion, on how to look at life. It's just 2. It's either or. And I only have one Aries in my sign. My Venus is an Aries. You're either looking at life through the lens of life happens to me, or you look at life as I am responsible and therefore in charge of, and not from a shame position, because I also believe higher up that we incarnated for a specific reason and our paths are different and our reasons to be here are different. So it's not to say that someone who got killed or died did something to attract that necessarily, but it's that idea that if we take a broader perspective, it's if you just choose that life just happens to you and there's no control and you did nothing to do anything, then that position always feels terrible and there's nothing to do about it and you have no power. And that's where depression comes from, I believe. And a lot of these, again, epigenetics and ways that our body shrinks down to be more susceptible to cancer, to be more susceptible to disease and bad things happening. Yes. And again, that's more epigenetics and the emotional side. But what I love about this approach is, even if we just look at, so the metabolic approach to cancer, food, people, it's food. So it's your first thing that you do, that you think about in life. If I don't eat, I will die. So let's be proactive about what we eat. Let's be proactive about taking care of that one leg of the three-legged table to do the best that we can. And then we can figure out the rest of that stuff later. We can move on to the next thing if something should happen. So I love this approach for that very reason, because it's not giving me evidence of why I'm a victim. It's giving me evidence of why I have the power to change it.
Right. Exactly. So, and I think you're spot on with that. Like the knowledge is empowering. It's like, okay, this is the circumstance of this moment, but I can still change it. That's what I think is such a difference, instead of someone saying, like people say all the time, well, my dad had cancer, my grandpa had cancer, therefore I'm going to have cancer. It's like, or people tell me I did everything right and yet I still got cancer. I'm like, well, what do you mean by everything right? Because you can't, as you said, quantify some of that. So part of what I try to do with this book is to help people start to see maybe blind spots, to help them understand, wow, I didn't realize that about myself or my personality or about my living environment or about my work or relationship environment or about what's on the end of my fork or, what I'm drinking in my glass right now, how that's impacting me on a much greater level than I know. And awareness or lack thereof is also very integral to our health and well-being. And so this is an exercise in self-awareness as well, which helps people start to bring back their own power, as you beautifully point out, which is so critical to our health and well-being.
Totally is. And I keep, as you layer on some of the sciences that prior to learning the sciences, I was like, yes, law of attraction. Yes. Didn't know it was quantum physics. Oh yeah. It's 100 years old. Cool. You're right. Epigenetics. Oh yeah. Okay. Yes. What is it? It's a science. Yep. Cool. Like I get this. I understand this, right? Eating good food. Like just some of it. It's like watching a play. When I was younger, I did happen to observe people in my life. There was someone who had bipolar and Libra. And I quickly at like 12 or 15 went, no, this is not, like, this was misdiagnosed. I didn't know anything about anything that I know now. I just knew, no, Libra, balance, one extreme to the other, pedestal, then fell down, trying to find their way. Like I just saw all of the pieces of a puzzle. And, people can see it when they're watching a movie or a show. They see the dynamics, but they sometimes lack the awareness in their own dynamics and how that plays out. So what I love is this consciousness approach, and that food is not this, it is part of the center because it's such a huge thing that we have to do every day. And that every day you have an opportunity to bring health into your life, balance into your life, nutrients into your life that can help your body do what it can do to help you heal. And then you can deal with the rest if all the things you're doing aren't working, right?
Exactly.
So the book is The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, Integrating Deep Nutrition, the Ketogenic Diet, and Non-Toxic Bio-Individualized Therapies. Again, another reason why I love you is because there's not like a one size fits all. This is bio-individualized. This is where medicine needs to be personalized. This is where recommendations need to be personalized. This is why I can't just make a program that fits everybody for everything. It has to be that here are these 15 different things I need to know about you. I do an intake very much like you do. I listen to the entire story and I ask all the questions and I form a picture and I see what's out of balance and I see how where things are, like in acupuncture, as you know, in Chinese medicine, right? Like the stagnation of qi is where there's something pulling. There's no more flow. It has stopped. Well, I'm looking at your life energy, your qi of how that works and where is that stopped. And the right advice for you may be the opposite for somebody else. And that's exactly what we have to look at. This isn't a one size fits all, and you have to learn something new about yourself in order to take this next approach. And I also got off our last call and I thought, okay, great. I have another doctor in my corner, like someone who I trust. So if any point in time I need you, I need this help. I'm like, okay, good. Right. Because I have Jeannie and Alan and I'm like, but Alan's getting up there in age. I'm like, okay, well, who am I going to trust? Who am I going to trust next? I need my arsenal of my healers and doctors and physicians and counsel, because I do a lot of my own healing, but I still need that, that resource of the next level. And so I appreciate it about you. So let's first start with what you think is the most important part to start with in terms of, you mentioned the terrain. Yeah. You're very thorough in your assessment and very deliberate and personalized in your recommendations. But let's start with the food piece. What food piece would you tell people they really need to pay attention to? First of all,
I want to qualify what the similarities are across a good diet across all ideologies, because diet, as you very well know, becomes dogmatic out there in the world. And if someone's like, well, this diet or the highway, that actually is a red flag. for me. So I want people to start to qualify for themselves what they need. Now, I take it to the level of even to their epigenetics and what their labs are showing me in that moment, and maybe the condition they're dealing with. And for my world, that tends to be cancer, and type of cancer and cancer personalities of the actual tumor itself, as well as what's wrapped around the terrain, in the terrain around that cancer. So when I think about the common denominators across all healthy diets, there's this concept of we really should probably be eating our big cofactor polyphenol rich vegetables. Really, it's like it is so many little enzyme processes that get things going. So kind of the base camp, your veggies, right? Kind of Terry Walls-esque of 9 to 15 servings of veggies a day is a really great way to get in your fiber and all of those phytochemicals that are so important to pull different levers in the body to tell things what's up. Then on top of that, in my world, it's quality fats. That's what feeds our nerves, our nervous system, our brain. That's what creates the cell membranes that help everything put in the nutrients, take out the toxins. That is fat dependent. And we've been told to avoid fat and be fearful of fat for, the past 50 years. And that hasn't gotten us very far, except for the fastest growing condition in the Western world today is neurological diseases. And if you've been basically eating no fat for the past 50 years, you are basically demyelinated. Your poor fat brain is starving to death. So we, of course, then replaced all that fat with sugar. And so where we had been starting to add a lot of sugar after the Industrial Food Revolution kicked in the 1850s, we really kicked that up since the 70s when we took fat away. Because when you take fat away, you take away flavor. So you got to replace it with something. And that something was sugar. And sugar in not so good forms, high fructose corn syrup and all these other nasty sugars. It's just been incredible. You can't even pick up a jar of peanut butter right now without seeing sugar in it. It's like, why in the world you need sugar in your peanut butter is beyond me. But that being said, is we've done this shift that talk about the pendulum affecting our thought processes, are affecting our mood, our hormones, our metabolic function, our ability to ward off disease and illness. We've shifted based on some really bad recommendations in the industry that have taken us away from our health. So in the common denominator, we want to be having good quality, clean fats. We don't want to be having trans fats and deep fried canola oil, things from the deep fryers at McDonald's and things like that are very, very high in omega-6s, very inflammatory, very, very damaging, creating a lot of oxidative stress in the body, creating a lot of depletion of our glutathione levels. When we eat those fats, every time you eat a fast food, anything, you basically remove your glutathione levels for the next few days. So you replace them again with all those vegetables I'm hoping that you're cramming in there as well. But ultimately, we are just slowly aging our bodies not slowly, we're rapidly aging our bodies much faster today than ever before by these food choices. So high sugar rusts us from the inside out. These poor quality of fats or too little of fats create a lot of inflammation. And then when we get into the protein discussion, you have camps that are like more protein, you have camps that are no protein, and you have camps that are everything in between. And really, this is where protein is almost like the individualizer, that's the guy that we need different amounts of protein at different times. So for instance, if you're undergoing a surgery, you're going to need a heck of a lot more protein in recovering from that surgery. Or if you are dealing with an aggressive cancer type that's very fed by things like mTOR and insulin growth factor, these major growth factors in cancer, protein actually feeds and fuels that part. So you want to lower that amount a little bit. We never want to be devoid of protein because you don't make amino acids without it. You don't repair tissues without it. You don't make hormones without it. So you need a baseline to repair and rebuild yourself. But where all the camps kind of disagree is how you're going to get those protein sources. So in my training, I come from a long lineage of Ayurveda, Chinese medicine, naturopathy, into standard of care and beyond of my nutrition training and background and understanding. But the oldest medicines that have been around since the beginning of time have never promoted a vegetarian or a vegan diet. They just haven't. You can't repair a sick body in Chinese medicine or Ayurvedic medicine without some form of animal protein, whether it's from ghee. Ghee is considered the ultimate recharge to the system, the removal of ama, the toxins, and the replenishment of the ojas, the tissues of the body, are coming from an animal source. So there's not there's not been an ever a vegan in Indian culture time. It was definitely a huge way to replenish and rebuild the body. In Chinese medicine, we would always use congees, but they would usually be cooked up in massive bone broths. And when you look at Chinese herbs, there are all kinds of bits and pieces of little critters that were taken in. It's like, oh, I think I'll have some cicadia today to help my cough, or, a little bit of worm, shavings, those are standard. In healing, Chinese herbs are very much, you're getting bugs and bits and bird parts and bone parts and all kinds of things to replenish and rebuild the body. So I think that that's one area that maybe we can utilize short-term a vegan diet for certain ways of putting some things down for a bit to let our bodies cleanse. Just like on the other end, there's some people who find good benefit in a carnivore diet that might take away a lot of things that are aggravating the gut for a period of time. That might be lectins coming in from a lot of places, that taking a little carnivore approach for a bit can be very balancing. But both of those ends are pretty hardcore and not very maintainable in my personal experience from testing people's labs and taking good histories with them to realize that we really are designed to be omnivores, and our needs will vary in different parts of our lives. Pregnancy, delivery, lactation, surgery, recovery of a chronic illness often need very different nutrients than being a hardcore athlete or just being a couch potato or just using your mind a lot in medicine or whatnot. It's like there's different needs for different people. So we have to be careful with that. So clean, real, seasonal are also very important to me. We've gotten so far from that. JJ, it's so funny how we now have a medical descriptor in the psychology world. They call it orthorexia. And this is the diagnosis for people who are overly concerned about what is in their food. So can you imagine who created that diagnosis? Hello, good, Archer Daniels Midland or Bayer or Monsanto, because I do care if something has extra, anything in it, pesticides, preservatives, glyphosate, any of those things, hormones, antibiotics, that is not normal. And if you're questioning that and then being called crazy for it, that's even more abnormal. And that's where we've also come to in the world today. I always tell people that this great bumper sticker on my fridge that says, eat organic food, or as your grandparents called it, food, right? And that's such the sign of the times. We've gotten so far away from what is, as you alluded to earlier, just intuitive and just sort of the way it is. And we've created this world that we now call the norm, and it's far from it.
Absolutely. I was, when I first picked up the book and I saw the Integrating Deep Nutrition, and Jeannie had told me about the book Deep Nutrition years ago, and I read it. And of course, I'm like, I don't want to eat those parts. Right? So thank God for bone broth. But when you were talking about Chinese medicine, I think I told you about my fibroid issue last time, maybe. Anyway, and there was a point in which I had released one naturally, and so I was bleeding and I was losing a lot of blood. And so I went and I wanted my body to do what it needed to do, and I wanted to support it. I wasn't trying to intervene, but I wanted to support so that I could let it do what it needed to do. And I went to China to my acupuncturist, and I was like, okay, I need to either stop the bleeding. It had gone on a little too long. I need to stop the bleeding. And of course, for those of you that don't know Chinese medicine, you can do everything from an already prepared tea to boil your own herbs, which I have a clay pot to cook my herbs in, and I have for a long time, but I don't always take it that way. I take pills, I take capsules, I take powders if I need to. And Chinese herbs are my hands down favorite thing to do because they're short term, or get your body in balance and then move on. And there's no you have to take this for the rest of your life, or there's not major side effects. And I remember getting the tea for the stopping of the blood. Oh yeah, crustaceans. I'm like, there's animal there are bugs in my tea. In the dried herbs. And I was like, oh, I probably didn't need to see that. I still made it because I was desperate, but unfortunately for a lot of people, they tell themselves these things are weird or bad and they don't know why I would do it. It's also how we've changed from, I remember looking at how our grandmothers used to, keep bacon fat to cook things and think, oh, that caused heart disease because you were told that heart disease was caused by fat, which we now know it's not. And we kind of knew it then. We know it's more inflammation. And now we're reverting back to, oh, Jeannie and I did a show. We did an audio show about what cooking oil to use. And we went over the different heat temperatures of the different oils and talking about how bad canola oil is for you, hot or not. Right? And looking at ghee and duck fat and bacon fat and things like that to cook them because they're sustainable and they don't oxidize your food, which creates free radicals, which creates cell death for people who don't know what that means. So, and in terms of orthorexia, I will say, and I'm with you. I want to know what's in my food, and I won't eat things that are weird or dye. Someone said, "Hey, do you want this?" I'm like, "No, there's dye in it. I don't want to eat dye. Do you know what dye does to you?" But I will say that at the same time, as I started the show and I said there was the emotional component as well as the environmental as well as the physical component, I do know people that are so, more you and me on steroids 10 times. That, right. Absolutely. And that lack of trust and that that fear and that victimization is also what I think equally creates cancer. So someone who thinks, no, look at me, I'm perfect. Like you mentioned control earlier, and I want to say, that's one of our biggest addictions in this day and age is control. And people don't realize that it's an addiction. They don't realize that the opposite of that is trust. Now we need information, which is what we're doing today, which is what you're doing, which is what I'm doing. Information helps to empower you, but there has to be that balance level of, there's no perfect, there's no right. And it is a balance and it is an ebb and flow. And it's a constant moving thing and you do the best you can, but there is this emotional understanding that, when you said it, I thought that's funny because I know some people that I would classify as that. But if they're talking about classifying someone like you and me like that, I'm like, no, that doesn't fit. Because I care about what I eat, but it's within balance of I drink wine, I occasionally have dairy, but I am gluten-free and I eat organic and I do keto and sometimes paleo. I know, but at the same time, I also live life. Like I don't feel restricted. I don't feel mad. I don't feel fearful. I don't feel like a victim. So I just want to point that out in terms of the balance of that hyper, right? There's like the hyper imbalance of, God, I have to control everything or I'm going to be sick. I had a client who her deepest fear was about getting cancer. Well, guess what happened? It's quantum physics. Just, you can't, she was doing some of the right things, but so let's talk about those people who are out there. Cause I know we didn't dive that deeply into it last time a little bit. It was about, you used to be a vegan and it's not to say, like you said, it's not extremist. There are times where that's appropriate and good. And then there's times where it's out of balance and you have to listen to your body. And if it's a dogmatic idea of, I have to do this for a bigger reason and I'm denying my body what it's telling me it needs, then it becomes detrimental, but not for everybody. Right.
Exactly. And that's the place where I think that, first of all, there's a couple ways you can go about this. Number one is, what are you naturally gravitating towards, right? If you have a sense of self, you also should have a sense of what works and doesn't work in your body, right? For those who are disembodied and always out there searching and seeking, maybe that's not the best way to take it because they might be like, this week I'm this week I'm this week I'm this. And it's okay to still be a living laboratory, experiment, try things on. I literally knew how bad I felt on dairy and wheat for so many years, but I liked them too much to say, and I go off them for a little period of time and then take them in again and then wonder why I felt so crummy. And then, I had to learn that the hard way. And when I was finally truly diagnosed with celiac, knowing that it's a genetic condition, it's not going to go away. It just is there. When I fully committed to taking gluten out of my diet, 100%, guess what? I could eat dairy again with no problem. So it was like, to me, I would so rather hunker down with a chunk of cheese than a piece of bread. And it was 10 years in August that I'd been 100% gluten-free. It was this liberating moment because at least I had an answer for why I felt a certain way. And it actually opened up another arena for me of what I could do and what did work in my body. So I fought that for a long time, trying to play the intuitive card. But I was very, as you noted with your patient, with the 16 pounds that he lost, it was a very similar dance for me. I was living on this diet that I'm like, I've got cancer, so I have to be a vegan. Oh, I got to be a stricter vegan because I got to hunker down more. And all the soy I took in destroyed my thyroid, and 45 pounds additional later, a destroyed thyroid, hair falling out in clumps, not because of chemo, and then starting to eat all of my grains and legumes to get my protein needs. Suddenly in my sugars, I was diabetic, high insulin growth factor because I was getting my protein needs met, but I was doing so at the expense of taking on way more carbohydrates to meet those needs. I just kept expanding more and more, which was just making me much more of a reservoir for collecting all those exogenous chemicals from the world, because now I have these giant adipose waste dumps in my body with that extra 45 pounds I was carrying around. That when I finally had the aha, I was like, God, I'm telling everybody else how to do this. I've got to try it on myself. And when I finally said, okay, I'm going to go, I had gone gluten-free for a period of time, but I jumped into the frying pan, like so many others, into the corn frying pan, which then I realized accidentally, I was like, oh, I was actually allergic, like an IgE allergy to corn. That took me a couple of months because I was like, please don't take away my blue corn chips and I didn't want to let that go. I had to listen to my body and then also validate with data for myself. That was my process. And here I am 10 years later, probably the most stable I've been in my weight, in my thoughts, in my hormones, in my energy level. It was like, oh, why did it take me that long to figure it out? So now I help patients get to that point a little bit quicker. Like you said, it's like, well, let's look at the obstacles to cure. Are these ideologies blocking your way? Are these certain exposures you're being met with constantly? Like, here's a good example of wine. I love wine, love it. But California wines make me very, very sick. And I really like them. So I had to learn the hard way. It's like, okay, a typical bottle of California wine, even if it's organic, still has glyphosate residue. It's also about 20 grams of sugar per glass. A dry farm wine from Europe, Spanish, Italian, French, has about 5 grams of sugar in the entire bottle and no glyphosate residues, and usually not sulfates added. So no headaches, no hangover, nothing tweaking my blood sugar. I get to still enjoy and be a normal human being on the planet with my glass of wine, with a glass of wine that works well with my body and my chemistry. So those are the types of things like you just said, if I have to take something away from somebody or from myself, it seems like it actually opens up more opportunities of what I can bring in. And that is mindset that you alluded to. If you look at it as, oh, I can't do gluten, then yeah, life's going to suck if that's how you're approaching it. But if you're like, wow, can't do gluten, but look at what just opened up at all these other interesting things I can now eat that didn't even know existed, or these other foods that are really delicious to me and very satisfying in other ways. And these other communities I'm now exposed to, and these other recipes and these other ideas. It's like, if you see the world in the limitations versus the opportunities, it's a very dark place to be.
I always talk about it's not elimination, it's replacement.
I love it.
So we find your habits and we replace it. And again, it's always a test. You just test and you see, and you do a couple different things. You can do blood work if you want to, but you can just see how you feel. And, you do an elimination, you see how you feel, you add it back in, you see what happens next. And there you go. I mean, it doesn't have to be some expensive trial that you're doing. You could literally just test it out yourself, but you have to do it right. Yeah. You're going to eliminate something. You need to eliminate it 100%, not, right. I'm going to do less. It's like, no, that's not how it works.
Right. Thank you. Exactly. It's like being sort of pregnant. It's got to go all the way out or all the way in.
Right. Oh, it's a light switch, guys. I have inflammation and I'm agitating inflammation, or I'm removing the things that agitate inflammation. It's not like I'm just going to reduce it and then it's all going to go away. So that's why I definitely always recommend elimination diets for people to uncover what is stopping them. And for some people, it's corn. I have so many women that are like, but I'm Mexican, I can't give up corn. And I'm like, Siete has great corn substitutes.
Siete has changed my life and so many others in my area. I'm like, where were you all along? So
right. Love their products. One of the things I learned in your book as I was preparing for our first interview, and I was so happy to have this conversation, was about the pH, because I can't tell you how many years I've been repeating that sentence that everybody says, cancer can't live in an alkaline body. Let's talk about that. That's why people say, oh, go vegan, because you'll become more alkaline. And so because cancer can't live in an alkaline. And that went from King and water to vegan diets to whatever.
Oh my word. So I'm married to a biochemist. And whenever he hears that, I always feel like his eyeballs going to like shoot out across the room, because we are literally these amazing dynamic beings, that there are tissues in our body that must be acidic to be working well. There are tissues in our body that must be alkaline to work well. And they all change at different times of the day and different seasons and different needs and different conditions and different temperatures. And you name it, they are always on the move to keep us in that homeostatic, balanced place. And so when we believe that we can bring in a certain diet to strongly push our biochemistry in one particular direction, first of all, it's an impossibility. You can do that with pharmaceuticals. There are certain pharmaceuticals that you can take in massive doses to push yourself into an alkaline or an acidic environment. But alkalosis and acidosis are also both ends of the spectrum that lead to death or extreme sickness, hospitalization, in fact, if you end up in either of those camps. So when I have people say, well, I check my urine pH, my mouth, I'm like, you check all you want every single day. Even if you did it every 5 minutes all day long, you will see its perturbations and its variations. And when you're eating a whole food, real food diet as close to the original source as possible, you are keeping all of those dynamic pathways in balance. When you are just living on a very, focused mono diet of, I use Steve Jobs as an example, is like he, got this diagnosis and everyone's like, oh, it was alternative medicine that killed him. No, it was dogma that killed him, unfortunately. That he had a very monochromatic life. Like he wanted his black turtlenecks and everything consistent so he could put all of his energy to creating what he did in this world. Amazing, right? And he did it. But he also did the same thing with his diet. He'd be like, I'm just going to eat apples, apple juice, applesauce, apple, whatever for months on end. Or go to carrots, or go to watermelon. He did that with his food as well. And if that's not good for anybody, cancer or not, to get on something like that and stay. Our body thrives in diversity. Diversity, microbiome diversity is the secret to longevity. And we've monocropped our food systems. We've monocropped our ideas. We've monocropped our exposures in the world. We've tried to put ourselves in these little boxes. And yet, we need to shake this up. So that alkaline acid myth is one that just drives me crazy. And I love when I read people like Chris Kresser and other people that debunk it, and biochemists that debunk it, because it is literally a biochemical impossibility without a pharmaceutical intervention, number one. And number two, I will tell you, there are many cancers that actually thrive in a more alkaline environment. That's the other side of the people. If you really look at certain pHs. So there are different things when you can look at different tissue types. And what the acid alkaline context really is about is that diseased tissue in the body creates an acidic environment around it. It's not caused by an acidic environment. It creates that environment. I'm simplifying this a bit, but I want people to understand, like chicken or egg. It's like the tumor or the tumor cell or the signaling to start to create a tumor cell or a tumor environment is built upon by all these different things coming into our terrain. That little mind, body, spirit, thoughts, food, environmental exposures, hormone balance, sleep patterns, microbiome, all of those 10 factors or more that go into the system is what tells these cells to signal and stay part of the tribe, or to go off and go rogue and turn into something we don't want them to. And when they start to turn into something they don't want them to, they start to change the environment around them. That's their design. They change that environment. The rogue cells do. So then they start to acidify the environment around them. And it's in that acidification that we change to a metabolic breakdown in the communication, the signals, and we start to utilize other methods of nutrients. We start to say, well, then let's all start burning sugar even higher and faster than we did when we were still a healthy cell. And so that's where the switch starts to happen. It doesn't happen first and then go there. The mitochondria become damaged first, then create the changes around them, then draw in more to keep their rogue party going. And that's where Western medicine and a lot of dogmatic ideologies go wrong out there, is we're still looking for the single target with the single treatment, whether that's a diet, whether that's a pill, whether that's a surgery or a chemo or a radiation. And we forget that we have to clean up that fishbowl first. We got to clean up the terrain first. And that's not eating an alkaline diet. That's that is the audit and the exploration of yourself of what has gone off track, what has lost its rhythm, what has lost its balance, what has lost its natural inclination. And that's the exploration that happens in each of us individually. And what took us off track will also be individual. It's not a one cause, one cure.
I love that you brought up Steve Jobs. I'm thinking about the movie. I haven't researched Steve Jobs' life, but I'm pretty sure he's a Pisces. And I remember from the movie, if the movie is accurate, that there was either he was adopted or something that happened with his parents. And then he had pretty much heartbreak from very early on. So while, yes, on the dogmatic side of I'm only going to eat apple and be a fruitarian, complete lack of balance, I'm also going to deny my emotions, which were very toxic. He was very, he stuffed all that anger and didn't process it. Again, this is based on the movie. So if the movie's inaccurate, then my assessment's inaccurate. But if it's at all a reflection of his life, again, I also saw the emotion. I'm looking for the emotional thread. I'm looking for the belief system that says, I'm going to ignore all this because emotions don't make me money. They make me vulnerable. They don't make sense. So I'm going to ignore them and I'm going to do what lights me up, which is great. But if you never address all of the garbage underneath the rug, it will start to smell, stink, and create toxicity. So anyway, so it's just so funny that you mentioned them because I remember thinking that as I was watching the movie, I was like, okay, well, I see the out of balance fruitarian part, but I see the huge emotional gap also in the cancer. A lot of times the emotional root of cancer generally is I'm giving up. Like I've given up on life. Like I give up. I can't do anything. It's each individual cancer has a different emotional, focus in terms of different feelings, different, like breast cancer often has to do with mothering, either resenting being a mother or not being able to be a mother. So there's a direct correlation emotionally to breast cancer for that. But back to the metabolic approach. So one of the things about the book that I want everyone to understand is this case and this perspective and this request of looking at cancer from the fact of, why is cancer created? You're looking at the mitochondria not working, and that across the board, regardless of an environment and the different combinations of factors that, like you said, we're trying to blame it on one thing, one treatment. Everyone does chemo and we're not looking at the terrain. So in terms of people who can do things to obviously get the book and read it, but other things that you're recommending people can do. Now you mentioned the ketogenic diet, and I know you're saying don't do, it's not about extremism, but would you say what comes to the middle would be something lower carb, lower sugar? And you already talked about it. The fat helps with the brain and it creates the cell membrane, and that's how we absorb nutrients and get rid of toxic waste, and the vegetables with the fiber and the nutrients. And did you say 9 to 12 servings was the recommended?
9 to 15 is what Terry Walls, who's, the MD who's cured herself from MS, very aggressive form of MS, who now guides tons of people through neurological conditions and autoimmune conditions with basically a above the ground, low glycemic, vegetable dense diet that's very fat forward, very ketogenic, in fact, in its approach. But she's this woman who did everything standard of care offered. She herself is an MD. And now she has clinical trials with vets and others on showing how this approach can heal many chronic illnesses. And so much of it is a lot of our foods give us the cofactors to our neurotransmitters, which is of course going to give us our cofactors to our thoughts and our ability. My husband, the biochemist, says there's only 2 things that make you happy: serotonin and dopamine. And it's but what are the building blocks or the degradation of them?
What's the belief I have to make my biology produce those?
Exactly. Because you can meditate those into different levels. That's why I like HRV technologies. That's your wearable biofeedback. That's why we can kind of quantify that you are pushing the engine in the right direction or the wrong direction, if you will, with your thought process. That's how you can really see how you can reframe your world with instant feedback, saying, yeah, your pulse just went right off the track when you started talking about your boss. But guess what? Our pulses will also go off the track if you eat a food that doesn't agree with you. So, you could eat something and take your pulse. And if it really speeds up after you ingest it, that's probably causing some irritation in your body. Just like when your pulse goes up when you're irritated with your partner or someone else. These things there's no separation of them when we try to do that. And the funny thing is this book, the sort of last chapter of the 10 terrain factors is the mental emotional. And I've said this so many times, it should be the first chapter. But no, people would pick up that book and be like, screw that, I'm out of here. They would just throw that thing and go. People like the tangible first. So I offer it in a process. We're not linear. at all. But this process I'm trying to teach in the book is helping people start with those safe, tangible factors that they can control, which does come back to their environment, which does come back to their food to some degree, right? And then you start to work yourself towards that door you have to eventually open up, because I've had so many patients get to that part and they're like, I choose death over leaving this terribly toxic relationship, or I choose death than actually speaking up for myself or taking back control of my life. I've unfortunately come to that experience more times than I care to count in my career path, that facing those elements of ourselves or our lives or our situations or our emotional choices are incredibly difficult. And so easing people gently and inviting them to come to that place is what we try to do with this approach. Now, what I love about you, JJ, is you're like, it's all out there from the get-go. Like, here it is, people, take it or leave it. But the type of patients that I draw in are literally facing their mortality. So when I talk about the specifics of diet, I'm talking about a very specific population of people that I work with that literally their food choices do make a difference whether they live or die in certain situations, right? So this is some of the things I talk about may sound really militant or really specific, but this is the population that I work with. So please have context around that as well. But ultimately, we still need to get to those emotional tidbits of this, because all of it's under, like, if you are literally, meditating all day long and in this beautiful Zen place, you're doing great, and you're eating McDonald's, you are undermining all of that powerful activity. Just like if you're eating perfectly and you're doing your macronutrient counter on your chronometer and you're checking your blood ketones and they're definitely therapeutic levels and you're doing great and you're getting your intermittent fasting in perfectly, but you are still living in a very toxic household, either physically of the radon or something along those lines, or with a partner that does not support you or does not see who you really are. Those are very painful ways. And that food does not then carry the level of nourishment that it otherwise would if you were in a more supportive environment. So these are the pieces that I'm always pushing people to explore within themselves. So when you talk about what can you do on the basics, the beginning of the book is really a questionnaire. Take a little self-audit. And that's a really great resource, and I'm even willing, if your listeners are so intrigued and they want to learn more before committing to purchasing the book, because that's not what this is about. That book was
No, it is what it's about. Buy the damn book, everybody. If you care about your health, it's $25 for crying out loud. Buy the book for crying out loud. If you're not willing to invest $25 in your health, and you get the answer, you have to go, well, I wonder why, because
I love it. Well, and that makes me happy, because my point is that I want people to have tools. And I wrote this book so I didn't have to say the same thing over and over again. Honestly, and I really thought my mom and a couple patients would read it. And now we're over 75,000 books sold, 5 languages out. A 6th just came out in Russian. We have 2 more coming out. It's clearly speaking to people on another level. And just as to your point, a lot of people are saying, wow, it doesn't have to be about cancer. It's about everything. But the first part of it is really about the self-accountability and the self-audit of yourself, your world, your exposures. Like I said, finding the blind spots and then looking at what's the priority, and whatever that priority is in that moment. Let's say you have 8 out of 10 yeses on that particular area. Dive in on that chapter and work on that bit for a while until you feel comfortable to venture into the other elements of this. And what I'll tell you is you start to work on one, because we are just a giant quilt. You tug on any thread in that quilt and you're going to impact the whole. So if you start to change your diet, you're going to start to change your mind. If you start to change your mind, you're going to start to change your diet. How can you possibly be a thoughtful, mental thought leader, enlightened, meditative being eating shit? There's no way they can go together. Right?
Agreed.
And that's where it's like the same thing. How can you be a person who's water fasting, but you're drinking water that has 7 known carcinogens in it from your city water and expect that that's going to help you heal? These are just the examples we're using, to help people understand, you have to address all these aspects to get the best benefit, and they will all keep elevating the frequency of each other.
Absolutely. That's why I love you. And why we could have like a 24-hour live stream call with each other, because I'm not nearly done again with so much that's coming up. Well, because there's so many similarities. Like, you just said you put it at the end of the book, the emotional piece, because you knew that it wouldn't be, in the beginning, it wouldn't be accepted. Well, guess what? One of my 5 secrets to releasing weight and ending body shame is, well, it's emotional. And the last 2 chapters are about the emotions. The first is about digestion and food. The second one's about exercise. The third's about hormones. Because once we get these in balance, and now we can deal with the emotions. But if you're hormonal and emotional, and you're having sugar and you're emotional and depressed, right, and you're not exercising or utilizing any of this, we can't talk about emotions yet until you get through these 3 first, right?
Yes.
And I'm, I've been joking about a show I wanting to record called The Roadmap to Healing, because, like you said, people they choose death over dealing with their emotions. And I've created a talk. It's called The Anatomy of Emotion, because it's taking people to understanding from an observer level what emotion is, why. Because there are so many people that feel so deeply that they stop thinking. They're out of their consciousness brain. They're not an observer brain. They think there's something wrong with them. So they try everything in life to avoid feeling that they can, running away from their feelings, which, just like a storm that's going to pass, has to be something expressed or will turn into cancer. It is you cannot hold on to toxic feelings and repress them and think that doesn't change your biology, or that doesn't change your internal chemistry or your choices or the things that you attract. And so, like, again, there's just so many similarities. And I know I have to let you go eventually here, but I have one more question. And we are going to be doing another show, because Dr. Nasha is part of a team of doctors who've been doing research and putting out information about mistletoe, which I was so excited to read about in this book, and the treatment of mistletoe, use of mistletoe in cancer treatments. And hopefully we can get maybe even a panel of a couple of you on to record that when the book comes out, because I want people to understand and know about that. Suzanne Summers was the first to bring it to my attention. And then it went in the back of my brain as something that I would consider if I ever got cancer, in terms of incorporating it. And so we talked about it on the last show, Healing into Dying. And we will talk about it on the next show. So, or unless we put another one in between. But let's talk about detox for a second. I know, because I mentioned, we talked about the emotions and we talked about food, but I feel like we can't end without mentioning something about environmental toxins and the need for detoxing. Talk about that quickly in terms of what you recommend, how often, what to do, what not to do on a general level.
So the cheapest, fastest, easiest place to start is daily fasting, 13 hours minimum a day. So by that meaning, finish dinner at 6 p.m., don't eat again until 7 a.m. Water, as much water, if you want herbal tea or even plain black coffee, is fine during that window. To push it a little bit further, because this is how your body cleans out. It needs a break from stuff you're putting in to help take stuff out. So we've gotten away from that. Everyone's like graze all the time, and that clogs up the works more. So if you're able to do that effortlessly, then graduate to 16 hours to 18 hours twice a week. That is it's free. It's free to all of us. It's there, and it helps you start to take out the garbage on a day-to-day basis. It's your maintenance. But if you have a lot of accumulated garbage, if you've had lots of toxic exposures or whatnot, then you might want to help it out with other ways. So sweating is huge. Now, my teacher, Dr. Walter Crinnion, who's since passed on, expert in environmental medicine, he's like, don't get hung up on which form is the best for causing you to sweat. It's like, just sweat. Just sweat every day, whether that's through exercise, whether that's sitting in your hot car on a summer day for a little bit and breaking a sweat, whether it's taking a really hot bath and kicking up a sweat, saunaing, whatever form you can do every day, if possible. Pumping with hot and cold in the shower. I go hot shower, 30 seconds cold, hot shower, 30 seconds cold. I pump that 2 or 3 times, always in my showers on cold. I have for nearly 30 years at this point, and it feels incomplete if I don't do a shower like that. If you have access to the great outdoors and you can go hop into a cold lake, do that, get those cold plunges. That is a mitogenesis. That creates new healthy mitochondria. It also kind of like wrings out the cells, because that vasoconstriction and dilation that happens with cold exposure is like a giant lymphatic pump, helps clear things more. Hydrate. Half your weight in ounces of good purified water. Flush out the chemicals, flush it out. If you are not pooping at least one hearty poop a day, you got to kick that up, right? So magnesium is usually what most of us are missing. A citrate form is what's going to float the boat, if you will. And so you want to be bringing that into bowel tolerance until basically things are moving effortlessly. If you need more assistance than that, colonics, home enemas, different things to help keep that going, maybe more fiber in from the top down is very helpful. Again, these are like the things that are just available. These are the basics. And then one of the most profound ways I think that we need to start taking advantage of our health, it's again free, nature. Get the heck outside. First thing in the morning, last thing at night. If you do nothing else to at least get that red light, even if you don't see where the sun is rising and setting, the frequency of light at that time of day is insanely healing for your HPA axis, for your melatonin production, for your serotonin dopamine balance, for your vitamin D synthesis, for everything to do its job. We need nature, we need light, we need the biorhythms of the planet to remind us, because we are living in the midst of a fabricated environment all of the time. You have to literally plug yourself back into nature regularly. The average American spends less than 15 minutes a day outside. That's horrifying to me. Even if it's you sitting out on your back patio twice a day, even if it's a dumping snowstorm, I don't care. Get out there, know what the seasons are doing, know what the moon is doing, and get into the rhythm with that. Make your own little rituals. Have a full moon and a new moon ritual. I was lucky when I was in medical school, we had a really good colleague of ours built a sweat lodge on his property, and we would all go do full moon sweats. I swear to God, that's what got me through some of the most intense times of my life and career, was monthly sweats through this. So there was the community, there was the physical sweating, there was this ritual and routine that we all brought together. People of all faiths would come in. We'd have like our hardcore, Buddhists and our atheists and our Christians and everybody in there together, just like praying in the way they know how and being part of something really collective. And then I think another piece that's also in the midst of this crazy world we're in, connect with another, like volunteer. If there's someone if you have a neighbor that have you not seen them leave the house in months, spend time with them, go volunteer somewhere, reach out to someone by phone, not a text, by an actual letter, not something. Connect with another. Our oxytocin levels are so depleted right now, and that leads to all kinds of hormonal dysfunction and emotional dysfunction and psychological dysfunction. And so connecting in real ways, in whatever way is possible, are really critical ways to heal the body, the mind, the soul, everything right now. And those are all free. That's what's so crazy to me, is it doesn't have to be. And it's so sad that we have to have this conversation, that I have to remind people to go back to do what we've done since the beginning of time.
And in one way, yes, I agree with you. It's completely sad. But the reality of it is, I've been thinking about it today, right? I'm going to go back to the emotional piece. The pandemic didn't create the fear. Absolutely. It just uncovered what was already there. People are living in huge amounts of fear because they don't know what they believe. They don't trust life process. They are afraid of death. They're afraid of disease. They feel like victims. They tell stories that keep them in victim mentality and never empower themselves. And so when you are someone who doesn't empower yourself and you are in victim mentality, then the excuse is, I can't go outside. Like workaholism, all these addictions of control and workaholism and denying ourselves and not feeling comfortable to express an emotion, not feeling safe, not feeling confident that I would know what to do, or that I would be okay if I allowed myself to actually feel what I'm feeling. All of that, I think, again, is a huge piece of why we're at where we are. Because we're not going to get any further, any healthier without talking about it. So because it isn't just all the medical fixes, it's the lifestyle fix. And I think we are moving back to a more sustainable, grow your own food, work in a garden, earthing. I think we are, because we have the arc of the food revolution and having GMOs come in thinking, oh, we're going to help be smart financially and feed more of the planet. And that might have been, the good reason why you did it, but then, screwed up the whole thing by adding poison into our food. So now we're taking it back. And this conversation could go on all week. And I don't think anyone would doubt that I could keep him here all week. So what we're going to do when the show, as the show is airing, of course, those of you that are watching this on YouTube, it's too late now. I'm kidding. We'll do an Instagram live the same week. So you can come over to Instagram and see, we've already done one.
Now we know how.
And now we'll do 2. And now she knows how. But that's okay. I didn't record that part. That part got deleted. And we'll do an Instagram live and continue this conversation to encourage you to take back your power. Look at the food that you're eating with a different response. Look at the emotions that you're feeling. Get the metabolic approach to cancer for anyone that you know who has cancer as a way to empower them. And they may not listen and they may not want it. It is work. You have to care enough about yourself to actually change something about what you do. But for those that are interested, those who have a little seed that you are planting that may grow into empowerment, I think it's a great book for everybody. I'm so excited to have it. It's so rich and full, and I feel actually safer. I feel safer for my future knowing that I have this, because it's another one of the resources like Dr. Christian Northup's book and Suzanne Summers' books. And I feel like, okay, I'm prepared for anything now. I can handle anything because I have the information right here. So please consider buying it for yourself and others. Also go to drnasha.com. Right? drnasha.com. Looks like Nasha. Nasha. Even Jeannie said the other day, she's like, Nasha. I'm like, you guys must, okay, whatever. But we were reading the book this morning. We have a practice we do every Monday and Wednesday, and we usually read a book and we write and then we share and we meditate and we go exercise outside at the beach. And I said, what do you want to read today? And I said, well, we're having the show today. And so he was reading it. He's like, oh, well, that was very good. I'm like, yeah, well, we're going to keep talking about it. We're going to keep reading it. Right. So it's like, again, it's science, but science that you can handle. Like, you're not over sciencing anybody here. It does get technical, but it's also very easy to read and understand. And again, it's a resource. So I would recommend everybody get it. Is there anything else that you would recommend that they do? Or I know you said there's an assessment at the beginning of the book, and, just anything else that the free resource that you may have?
Definitely. On the website, if you just go to drnasha.com, there are 2 freebies. You can download the 5 steps of what to do if you're diagnosed with cancer. It's a very good resource. I get lots of feedback of how literally life-saving they felt that information was. And then the other freebie is just this little PDF poster I did for a presentation last year, I believe, on metabolic flexibility, and that there are many ways to roam. So you can get there with fasting, you can get there with high fat, low carb, you can get there with exogenous ketones, but basically showing that 12% of Americans, less than 12% of Americans are actually metabolically healthy. And this poster gives you the research and the resources to show that. And that shows that we all need to start taking responsibility and kind of cleaning that up within ourselves. And it gives you some great sort of little resources and how-tos on that as well, also for free.
Excellent. All right. Again, thank you so much. I love you. You're amazing. And I can't wait to have another conversation, especially on Instagram and possibly maybe other places. We'll talk offline. So anyone, go to drnasha.com, get those 2 free resources, and buy her book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Again, if not for you, for everybody that you know who's sick or could use it, especially anyone that has cancer. So thank you again for coming on the show, Dr. Nasha.
Thanks, JJ. Absolute pleasure.